We've had 3 days of complete and utter media hysteria around this new variant. But what is the evidence about Omicron? How much of a threat does it actually pose? And has the UK completely overreacted? You can vote now in our Twitter poll at GBNews. And please email me your thoughts too to dan@gbnews.uk. But now, let's bring in the experts to hash this out and to help you make up your minds. Carl Hennigan is the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford, and Sally Jane Cutler is a Professor in Medical Biology at the University of East London. Carl Hennigan, I've been needing to hear from you on this because throughout the pandemic you have always brought so much clarity, and it sounds odd given it's your job, but evidence to what often is hysteria in the media. So do we need to be panicking about Omicron?
Well, look, I think, Dan, it's very clear. If you're the wise physician and you go into a healthcare position like I do, I work at weekends at urgent care, and all I do is ever panic, you've got a problem. When faced with urgent conditions like this and urgent situations, what's incredibly important is that we let the data emerge. We have a huge issue now because what's happened is within 48 hours, the WHO said this is a variant of concern. It's already starting to rail back from that. But you've said it. This is their exact words. It is not yet clear whether Omicron is more transmissible. It is not yet clear whether infection with Omicron causes more severe disease. And at this stage in the pandemic, when so many people, if you look at the ONS data, looks about 60% of the population have had the infection already, the increased transmissibility is not the issue really, because so many young people have had the disease. We've seen that actually rates in over 60s are dropping with the boosters. The key issue is about the vaccine and its impact. And that's what this comes down to. We're much better staged than what we were a year ago. And therefore, the idea that we're now panicking reflects where we are in society. It was only a few weeks ago when petrol stations were queuing out the door because we thought we were running out of petrol. We're in that state of mind now. Exactly. What's clear now is we need wise politicians who understand when to step back, reflect and say, let's look at the data, let the evidence emerge.
You've already made me feel more calm, which, believe me, I need after the weekend. Sally Jane, no, you actually think the government was right to go ahead with all of these?
I think they're absolutely right. They've learned from the mistakes of what happened when Delta was imported into the country, where they dithered for weeks and weeks and weeks before they put in any controls. And by the time they realised that Delta was actually something that did need to be controlled, it was too late. And so this time they've actually learned from that example, and they've actually put their foot on the brake really, really quickly for them. And basically, this is hopefully going to buy us some time. And while we've got this time, we can actually look at the emerging data. We don't have a lot of the answers that we need at this point in time. As the other speaker said, we don't know about the transmissibility in a vaccinated population. We know it's highly transmissible in South Africa, but there you're looking at a population that's only got a vaccine uptake of about 24% at this point in time of people that are fully vaccinated. We know nothing about the severity at this point in time. So again, we need to know that. And we don't actually know that the wonderful vaccine rollout that we've had in the UK is actually going to protect us from this particular variant. We just don't know any of those answers.
I understand that. But Carl, can I just ask you about the specific measures that the government has introduced? Because obviously you're the expert on this, but I struggle to see the evidence behind the introduction of, for example, this 2-day self-isolation when you return from travel, masks in public transport and shops, but not in hospitality settings. Is there any evidence with those particular new measures to show that it would stop the spread of Omicron?
So I watched the excerpt before in your expert panel, and I thought it was very interesting. What they illustrated is the problem of uncertainty. Now, 20 months ago, we could tolerate uncertainty because this was a new emerging pathogen. What you had at then is much better thinking going into the pandemic than what we see now. The job of evidence is to reduce uncertainty so you can make informed decision. To do that, you require high-quality evidence. High-quality evidence for masks has seen 2 randomized controlled trials, despite it's the most important go-to measure that we see anybody wants to do. The failure to reduce that uncertainty means that you can get opinions on both sides arguing about what to do next. Normally, when we have uncertainty, we do trials. It is not difficult to do cluster trials in school shops to understand where it makes a difference or not. And we don't act. But the whole rules have changed in this pandemic. The whole game's changed. And what you just showed was people arguing with poor quality evidence, and it looks on both sides, and then opinion dominates the discussion. And I find it incredibly difficult.
Well, yeah, because I just wanted to talk to you about that, specifically in reference to masks, because, of course, at the start of the pandemic, you have Jonathan Van Tam, you have Christopher Whitty, you know, the top government scientists in official positions saying there's no evidence that masks stops the spread in any massive way. Has the evidence changed since then, or has our political position changed since then?
So going into the pandemic, there was a Cochrane review that included 9 randomized controlled trials that showed at best they made no difference. Apart from 1 or 2 scenarios where there was some interesting evidence they may work, they were generally in the household when it's secondary attack. If you have your children have an infection, you might want to know in a very short window, does intervening in the household make a difference? Well, these are sorts of questions where you want an answer to. But if you're going to go outside into the world, what we do now, it's very clear that cloth masks don't work. You talked about 2 aspects, and one aspect is surgical masks. Well, that's a Danish trial. So if we think surgical masks work, we have to give everybody masks. They have to use them and dispose of them when they finish with them. Do not put them in your pocket because they're an infection risk. Now, when you go to Austria and Germany, it's not surgical masks they were wearing FFP masks. They're the medical grade masks we use in hospital settings when we want to completely reduce all filtration. And I know somebody who told me about what it was like in Austria, and they said they do impose them. There's no slippage in Austria. And where are they? They're in full restrictions. So I think if you look in the round, it's just a complete failure to reduce the uncertainties with high quality evidence means we're going to keep arguing about this issue. That should stop. And the advisors at the top, the chief medical officer, should be calling for studies, particularly in school settings.
Because Sally Jane Cutler, obviously masks and these mandates have been in place already in Wales and in Scotland. And another Oxford professor, James Naismith, has actually said recently the ONS survey results on prevalence shows that the Scottish and English approach to masking, although formally different since July, has made no meaningful difference to Delta.
My understanding of the literature and the data is the fact that looking overall at the studies that have been done on mask wearing, and I agree that there's a lot of heterogeneity in the data, but basically, although it doesn't stop totally, it can reduce the transmission. So basically, it's a step in the right direction, just to slow things down. And it's not foolproof. It's not the only measure. And I think what we need to have is not just the mask wearing. We also need to have people engaging fully in that lateral flow testing, the asymptomatic testing. We also need to try and be distancing where possible and to try and keep some ventilation in our indoor spaces that we're sharing with other people. So it's not just mask wearing. We need all these measures together. And hopefully that'll help reduce and slow the transmission.
OK, I understand. And actually what you're saying, Sally Jane Cutler, is very similar to what Nicola Sturgeon was saying in her press conference to the Scottish people earlier today. So what you're propagating is definitely something our leaders are talking about. But Carl Heneghan, final question to you. Can you understand why folk like me listen to Sally Jane Cutler or Nicola Sturgeon saying that and saying, hang on a moment, we're not in March 2021. A lot of us are triple jabbed. Over 90% of English adults now have COVID antibodies. Why do we have to go back to all of those measures, social distancing? It doesn't make sense to me.
So I think there are quite a few issues here. There are lots of people who are looking for a very simple answer to a complex problem. They just think we can turn off COVID. It took us almost a year to understand you can't have zero COVID and it has to be endemic. And as they look around the world, they start to understand slowly that we're all in different areas. Doesn't make sense for me to talk about we should have been restricting earlier in the summer, because now people are saying that actually was a good move, because if you're going to get this infection, you want it when you've got your antibodies on board and in the middle of the summer, not in December and January when you've got other circulating co-pathogens. But interestingly, I think this is where we are on the problem, Dan, is the technology is amazing, but we don't understand how to interpret that technology so far. We've done more testing than ever, more genomic surveillance than ever, and people don't understand what it means and how to interpret it. So I think we're going to have one or two more cycles until we get to a situation where people understand. This is it. I'm going to give you the date, though. Right, it's going to be March.
I can't cope. Okay.
It's going to be about March, Dan. I think by March, there's going to be a big issue. By then, we've got the renewal of the Coronavirus Act, and we've got decisions. Should we spend 18 billion more on test and trace, despite people not understanding the huge problems that are accruing in healthcare, ambulance waits, cancer care, social care, all of these issues? And what's happening again is we're completely distracted from them. I can tell you, this Saturday, I'll be in urgent care. There are huge infrastructure and structural problems that are occurring in the NHS. What we're talking about here, none of it is going to fix it. It's a complete distraction to the problems at hand. And at some point, there's going to be a day when we have to collect the debts. The Ides of March, in March the 15th, we'll be looking at the debts and thinking, look at all the problems we've accrued trying to get to this suppression strategy when the answer was already in front of us. And as you look at somewhere like Sweden, where they have the same policy now for 2 years in a row, and we have to ask serious questions. If you look at where they are in the deaths per million, they're about 60th in the world. You'd be asking a question going, why don't we have cool, calm policies that explain to people, your risk does go up at this time of year. The defense for you is if you're at risk, is to take on board that risk and make decisions to stay at home and reduce your contacts when cases are going up. That makes complete sense for the government to give us our risk and teach people how to manage that risk with those most at risk in society.
Responsibility. I couldn't have put it better myself. That was Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford. And before that, Sally Jane Cutler, Professor of Medical Microbiology at the University of East London. Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.